Welcome to Still Unbelievable, a podcast by Reason Press, where we examine religious claims, especially those made by Christians, and we regularly respond to items that are featured on the podcast Unbelievable. We embrace dialogue, but as skeptical former believers, we will also criticise unfounded claims and unsupported beliefs. Hello everybody, welcome to an episode of Still Unbelievable. This is your regular intro host, Mathew, and I'm joined by my regular partner, Andrew. Say hello to the world, Andrew.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to this episode of Still Unbelievable. It is going to be a great show.
It is, and yeah, there was a subtlety there. We'll skip that over quickly. Welcome to our special guest, Daniel. Thank you very much for joining us again. Welcome, Daniel, from the right side of America.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
It's genuinely a guest, and let's just get this out of the way because I need to be shamed and I need to be embarrassed by this. I'm sweating twice as much as I need to be on this hot English evening because we've just been chatting for 40 minutes and I've just realised that I hadn't been recording. This is the first time in the history of these podcasts that I've been doing with Andrew, and it had to happen sooner or later, and it would happen today. So I'm an idiot, and most of the last 45 minutes we're going to try to recreate. We shall see how it goes. So just to tell our audience, because they weren't listening last time I said it, you and I got involved in a Twitter conversation about 5-6 weeks ago, and we were talking about the resurrection of Jesus, whether it was reasonable to believe it or not. And that Twitter conversation continued a bit, and then we had a Skype conversation around about 3 weeks ago, and we had a good chat. We chatted for over an hour, I believe, and we chatted around those areas. So heads up to the audience, this is genuinely going to be a pleasant conversation. There's going to be no raised voices, there's going to be no verbal fisticuffs. Yeah, there's going to be none of the polemic and the ad hominems and the kind of things that are often associated when Christians and atheists get into dialogue about things they disagree.
I thought you were going to say when Andrew starts talking.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. Maybe another time. You've thrown me off my track now. So,
sorry.
Daniel and I actually found that we got on very well, and for the last 40 minutes, he and Andrew have actually got on very well. Believe it or not, listeners, but the evidence is not there, so you're going to have to decide whether or not you believe me.
No evidence.
there is no evidence. No, none whatsoever.
No, we have eyewitness historical accounts. We were all there.
Oh yeah, that's true.
But,
we have independent attestation.
Yeah, but two of them are atheists, and they clearly can't be trusted. So you know,
clearly. In fact, one of them's an Android user. Oh, sorry.
Which one is that?
Which one is that?
Presumably, being in California, you use the only phone that is sanctioned by your local government, Daniel.
I do use an iPhone. You caught me.
Oh,
so
dear, I'm
outnumbered
and outgunned. That's going to be a problem.
Oh, I wasn't going to tell him. I was going to make him guess. Which one of us is... Are you also a Mac user?
I am on a PC right now, but I do have a Macintosh also.
Just have a Mac.
We're going to be friends. Yeah, we're going to be friends.
So, oh, dear me, this is going to be more cards. This is going to be a complete nightmare to edit. I hate you both. I really do.
You're going to cut all of this out?
I'll make that decision when it comes to editing, depending on how easy it is to cut it. Oh, dear me.
We have this. So, Daniel, we have this thing. It happens on both shows. Matthew and I are both developers. We're software people. We do various computer things, and he's a Windows and Android guy, and I'm a Mac and iPhone guy. And so this thread of conversation that you have gotten unwittingly drug into is a theme in the shows. We pick on each other about our technology choices. Of course, it's just because Matthew doesn't realize that he hasn't made a technology choice yet, but we
So Matthew
what?
is PC Master Race.
Say that again.
Matthew, your PC Master Race.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm PC Master Race. Yes, that's quite
exactly right.
I'm always tossing about. Yes, that's me.
I do like PCs too, so I'm kind of straddling the fence. I have my laptop is always going to be Macintosh, but I always have a desktop PC too. So.
Oh man, I'm sorry. So for the folks that listen pretty regularly, I have a truckload of PCs, but they all run Linux. So
okay. None of them run Windows, huh?
Yeah, no, I mean Windows. Windows is a virus. It's
That's because the license fee is too cheap. That's right. That's what it is.
Well, it's because it's criminal to license the thing.
Right.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
it's
a miracle that Andrew and I are even friends. Really, that's what it is to get us back on track.
Miracles do happen. You guys are friends.
They do, and it is because of Matthew's genteel nature that we're friends. I assure you.
I thought you said it was because of the gin in my glass.
Drinking gin right now?
I am. I've got gin and tonic right in my hand right now.
Oh man, I should go get some whiskey.
Yes.
I am out of alcohol, and yeah,
that's why these podcasts never quite go right. Anyway, that's the 5, 6, 7 minute introduction completely wasted. Shall we start again? So, Daniel, you and I, we started talking a little bit about textual criticism and historical criticism. I'm not going to jump straight into the historical criticism, but I'm going to take a slightly different path than we did 30 minutes ago, just because I roll like that. And this is what happens when you're Android. You keep crashing and you never start in the same place again. So I thought I'd just feed it to you, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm just, see, that's just too easy. I'm going to give that one 20 minutes before I come back to it.
I'm just going to start with a straight out and forward question, and you can lead us into historical criticism by whichever means you wish. Why should I, as a skeptic, why should I take seriously the proposal that the resurrection of Jesus actually happened?
Well, so I would argue, and again, I'm not a expert on any of these things. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a PhD. I'm just a pastor, really. But I would argue that based on my reading and based on the things I've seen, I think that the resurrection of Jesus is historically plausible. If you use like historical criteria to evaluate whether or not this event happened, and you treat it as just another event, the resurrection is just another event. And I know this is the key thing, whether or not you should treat the resurrection as just another event, right? And we can get into that later. But if you do treat it as just another event, there's a lot of historical support for it, I think. There's more sources that talk about this resurrection event than almost any other historical event around that time period. You can look at different historical methods that people use to determine whether these sources are lying or not, or making things up or exaggerating. And I mentioned one earlier, like one is independent attestation, meaning different independent sources all saying the same things. Sometimes they might disagree on some small parts, but when they agree on some of the big things, you can be more reasonably sure that happened. Different things like that. So those are some of the historical criteria that they use to do source criticism, which is like kind of just evaluate, is that source or is that person fibbing or not? Are they exaggerating or not? Are they making things up or not? Or is it more plausible that this probably did happen? And so based on those things, I think it is pretty, like, if you just look at it from that historical criteria, it is good evidence, I think, for the resurrection. Now, obviously, I think our conversation was moving more towards, but should we treat a miracle event like just any other historical event? And I think that is a good argument. I think that is probably the key issue there, actually, rather than actually diving into all the historical evidence and all that.
So let me ask you a question along those lines, because we really were right in the thick of it. And I'm going to, so I'll come back to Darren Brown, because it seemed like that was going pretty well, but I'll use a different example because I made a wretched, horrible mistake earlier this week. I'll just let the listeners email me and ridicule me for it. So, a family member sent out a video a few days ago. And this video was of a woman who had an arm that was really, really badly broken, swelling, and the arm was misshapen and all that sort of thing. And in this video that lasts a minute and a half, 2 minutes, you slowly see her arm getting better. And at the end of this video, after there are people chanting around her, and there's somebody's throwing water on her, and clearly there's a lot to do about this arm, right? And so this was sent out as a video that supports miracles. We have video attestation of a miracle. That's the way this thing came out in my family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now I will tell you the thing that I ought to be ridiculed over, because we have this big family group text, like 16 of us, right? And we text back and forth as a family. And I was texting with 2 skeptical family members, and I wrote this long rant about this video. Yeah, her arm hurts so much that she's able to stand exactly in the frame of the camera.
Yeah.
You have no idea who she is. God is so good that he forgot about all the children with cancer so that he could heal her arm. I was being really, really, really snarky, right? When I sent the text, I accidentally chose the wrong group and sent it to the, I sent it to the whole, and these are there's one, two, there's at least 3 Pentecostal preachers in the group. There's my whole family is deeply conservative evangelical, and it broke the family group. People asked to be, it's a big deal. But I think the larger question remains, even with good video evidence, does that actually increase the likelihood that a miracle occurred?
Yeah. That's a good, I think when Matthew and I were talking about this earlier, I did ask, what if there was video evidence of the resurrection? Would that change your mind at all? And I don't know if you remember, but I think you said that no, it probably wouldn't, right?
I'm trying to remember exactly what I said. I'd have probably hedged. I wouldn't have immediately said yes, that's for certain. I'd have hedged some way or another. Is the way I'd have answered. So that's probably what I did. Yeah.
And so because I think that, if that's the case, right, historical evidence doesn't matter at all, right? Because if we're talking about a different framework for what evidence is. And I obviously don't come from that framework. I have a different framework, probably a little bit more akin to your family members, to be honest, right? But I understand.
So, look, I love my family members, by the way.
Yeah. Yes.
Notice I claimed them, right? These are my family, right?
Yes.
These are the people that my daughter knows. These are the people that we rely on when we blow a tire out on the interstate late at night. And to be fair, I apologized for sending what was really I think all of the questions were questions of epistemic value, right? Of ontological and epistemic value. And I think that we could try to approach them with the tools of empirical investigation. But I did apologize, for letting that one loose while the snark gun was running around between all the questions too, right? Because we can have these conversations like we're having now, and we can have them quite charitably and quite reasonably. But what they saw was Andrew in full-on rant mode, right? And that was unfortunate. But I do think, I think for me, to say that because something is well attested doesn't necessarily move the bar. Now, we should have the conversation about whether it should move the bar, right? Because that's an important issue. Or are we being too reserved? Are we not being as philosophically charitable with the idea as we should? If we're going to say that if we had video attestation of Jesus' resurrection, for instance, and we're going to be asked to take that seriously, and we should, right? Would we take that seriously? Well, then we would have to ask the same question about the video resurrections from the claimed reincarnation of Sai Baba.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And as a skeptic, I don't know how to differentiate between those types of historic accounts easily. Right. And I really want to know what you think about that.
Yeah. I think this is a framework issue, right? So for me, if I received that same video, I'll be honest with you, that you received from your family members, I'll be honest with you, I'd probably be pretty skeptical about it. It's just that I do exist in this, I think it's kind of a modern Western scientific framework. I kind of think that way a lot, actually.
Sure.
And I'll be honest with you again, like a lot of things in my life happen that I think are miracles, and I struggle to believe in them, right? And I put myself through different things to help me believe more. Isn't that weird, right? That's not being very like objective. It's like you want to believe, so you're forcing yourself to believe it. Kinda. There is some of that, right? And the reason why I do that, though, is because I think the framework for belief comes from a different place than just pure evidence. So if we have a video or we have a piece of evidence, it's like, how strong does that evidence need to be? And what type of evidence what constitutes truth? What constitutes reality, right? And so from my framework, I see the scientific worldview, and I think it has a lot to offer, but I don't see evidence that framework is categorically or objectively better than, like, let's say, a non-skeptical or faith-based framework, right? In terms of like epistemology, right? I don't see that is just plain better, right? Or that there is any evidence that skeptical framework is better. I'll give you an example of this, which is that do you guys know Malcolm Gladwell?
I don't
I don't
know.
think I do.
Okay, he wrote a couple of pretty popular books. I don't know. I won't. And in his most recent book called "Talking to Strangers," is the bestseller or whatever. But there was a guy who was the one who kind of figured out that Bernie Madoff. Have you guys heard of Bernie Madoff?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So this one guy, he's the one who figured out Bernie Madoff was cheating everyone, right? And so the book was kind of like, one of the stories was investigating how come he knew, whereas everyone else didn't. And then it basically argued that this guy had a skeptical framework, which was really excellent for figuring out the truth in this case, in Bernie Madoff's case. But then, on the other hand, when talking to this guy, I forgot his name too, Malcolm Gladwell found that he was actually very skeptical about a lot of things in life, not just Bernie Madoff, but he often carried a gun around because he was afraid that people would, Bernie Madoff's agents or whatever, and he would buy into a lot of these things, and a lot of the facts he would interpret in a skeptical lens, right? So what the argument was basically that skepticism helps in certain cases, but on other cases, it does lead you down in kind of a crazy road, right? That doesn't help your life. So you have to balance these types of the impulse for skepticism, which is very good, but also not get too skeptical about too many different things, right? And there has to be an element of trust in just living human life. So that's kind of the framework that I come from, is I'm trying to balance these things, right? So I don't want to be skeptical about everything. There's certain things that I think are just good for me to buy into, even if I do have, maybe there's some evidence, but there's not full on 100% scientific proof of this, maybe I should still buy into it. So that's the level of what level of proof are you going to require for each different thing? And for me, it's like at the end of the day, what is valid, but not only what is valid, but how is that going to shape your life? So again, I'm not trying to throw out evidence completely, but it needs to be. We don't have evidence for everything, right? There's not 100% evidence for everything, so we cannot operate that way. Nobody operates that way. So it's like, what level are you going to choose? And you have to choose a certain level. And where is that going to be? So I think the difference between maybe myself and maybe some of you is that, or atheists or whatever, is that maybe my level is just a little bit lower. That's kind of how I see it.
So I try to apportion the evidence that I need for a thing to how important that thing is. If I'm going to get on an airplane, I need better than a 50-50 probability that the airplane's going to land safely after takeoff.
Yes.
Right? And in that case, I want a lot better evidence, right?
Yeah, 50-50 is not good for me.
Right, yeah, not good for me either. But,
you have more faith than I do.
Yeah, no, right. So I wouldn't get on an airplane where they said, hey, we're gonna flip a coin, and that wouldn't be good enough. On the other hand, I want even better than 99% out of an airplane, right? But I eat in places where the local health department rating might be 91 or a 92, right? And there's certain foodborne pathogens that can kill you dead as canasta, just like an airplane crash can. But there are things where I'm willing to accept less evidence because I'm apportioning the evidence to the importance of, something like an airplane flight versus a single meal. And I don't know kind of what 100% evidence would mean in my worldview. As far as I can tell, there's nothing about which I am 100% certain, unless we're talking about something where the rules have been so well refined that we can use the framework to demonstrate itself. Something like 2 + 2 divided by 2 = 2, right? Mm-hmm. So we can talk about certainty in something like math, whereas we can't talk about certainty in terms of the human condition. And so I try to apportion the evidence to the importance of the thing that I'm talking about. If I want to buy a bike for my daughter, they all look about the same. They all weigh about the same. They seem to be built largely similarly. I wouldn't get overly concerned about which decision to make.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're saying that depending on how important that decision is, you would need more evidence, right?
Sure.
So, I guess one thing I would ask you is how would you determine if something is important or not? I know you gave the example of getting on the plane. In that case, it seems like the importance is about a safety issue, right? Whether or not
Sure.
you're going to live and die, right?
Sure.
Are there any other axes that would make it more or less important? Let's say a decision that would make, I don't know, maybe about happiness, like something could make you really happy or not, or I don't know if there's any other axes that I could name, but.
Yeah, of course there are. So happiness is a good one. Now, I will say that, let's say I'm going on a round the world vacation. That would probably make me pretty happy, to be honest. Well, maybe not in the days of coronavirus, but we're just thinking where everyone understands, right? So,
yeah.
and so going on a hiking trip through Europe, going to see the countries around the Pacific Rim, all of those things I think would be fantastic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that would make me very happy. And so that is one axis. On the other hand, if it was, it'll make me very happy, but there's only a 50-50 chance that the airplane's going to get there, right? Yeah. and so we are in this constant state of measuring what is most important. And in one sense, I don't necessarily have direct evidence that going on that world tour would make me happy, right? I might, although I've done a lot of travel in my life, but I might be miserable for some unforeseen reason, right? But it seems more likely that I would be happy, and it seems more likely in a real world example that the plane's going to make it fine.
Yeah.
So yes, there are other considerations. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think is the really interesting thing, is that what do you characterize as important, and how do you evaluate that, right? Because that gets into like kind of value systems, right?
Sure.
Which every culture is actually kind of different in terms of that, and so based on that like a lot of the way we evaluate evidence for different events, let's say like the resurrection, it's actually tied in with our value system, right? And so in my perspective, a lot of the way we evaluate evidence is actually more subjective than we think it is. You kind of understand what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree, but I do understand.
Okay.
Matthew, did you inhale? Is that sorry?
Yeah, no, I'm still there. I'm listening and nodding silently. So carry on.
Okay, so I don't know necessarily that I agree that our worldview. It may be quite often that our interpretive lens comes from our worldview. I don't necessarily agree that it should or that it has to. So, for instance, we can think about teaching a kindergartner to add, right?
Yes.
And the kindergartner has no worldview for adding.
Yeah.
And the kindergartner may not even understand why adding is important. And it may even be that in the kindergartner's worldview, it's not important at all.
Yeah.
Yet this is a skill that we teach, and it's one that is independent of how you feel about it. Now, I already acknowledge that math is objective in a way that lots of other things aren't. And so feel free to push back with that, because that would be exactly right. On the other hand, so to take something that's non-mathematical, there's no worldview that I'm aware of, and though I'm willing to have the conversation, where we could say, because of my worldview, the evidence is drinking battery acid is good for me.
Okay.
Right? And so I'm not sure that worldview does it for me in that context, because there are things that, despite worldview, remain with some sort of objective evidence that might be contrary to the worldview that should impact the way we see things. Right? We should change our worldview. If we think drinking battery acid is good, we should be able to analyze the evidence and conclude actually. And so while battery acid seems an outrageous sort of example, and it is a little hyperbolic, we can carry this over to childhood marriage in third world countries, or using child slave labor to produce goods, or whether our use of herbicides and pesticides and creating the hypoxic zone every year, and it seems to get a little larger every year, the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico, as a result of runoff through the Mississippi Delta. Our worldview seems to say, or at least a lot of our worldviews seem to say, we can sort of ignore that. But hopefully, through our analysis of evidence, we would do better. Another perfect case of this is masks and COVID-19.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a very rambling paragraph, so my apologies. But all of that to say that I'm not sure that worldview should be the thing that helps us evaluate evidence.
Okay.
I think it is a feature of it, though, Andrew. Although I don't think either of you are suggesting that a worldview is something that we're born with. A worldview matures and develops as we do, and our worldview changes and adjusts over time. Sometimes in some people it changes more than in others. So a worldview is still something that we form based on what we see in the world around us. So there's clearly something below that predicates what our worldview will be. Yeah, but then I don't think either of you were suggesting otherwise. But then, yeah, after the worldview is formed, I think we do accept things. And I think what you said, Daniel, a few moments ago about, we have levels at which we're prepared to accept things. And I think that is true. And I think pointing at our worldview as the source of that is possibly the right area, but maybe it needs to go lower than that still. And maybe it's the mechanism that creates our worldviews that more accurately informs our layer at which we're prepared to accept things. But that
was just criticism, Matthew. I accept what you said.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Can we have that recorded, please?
Not if I'm the one doing the editing. Yeah, not if I'm the one doing the editing. We can't.
But a phrase, while you were talking a few moments ago, though, Daniel, a phrase that came into my mind when you were talking about the levels at which we're prepared to accept things was a phrase called a useful fiction. Is that a phrase that you're familiar with
yes.
At all? So I'm wondering if that is kind of the area that you were flirting with the edges of, that we accept something that you used the word happiness in your conversation with Andrew, and I'm going to replace that with the word comfortable. We land in a place that makes us comfortable, where we're content in that place, and anything that maintains that that state of contentedness is accepted, and anything that upsets that causes discomfort is outright rejected. And maybe that's the sort of thing that you were thinking of.
Yeah, that basically, yeah. I wouldn't obviously call the Bible or the resurrection or any of those fictions, right? I wouldn't go there, but I understand the sentiment of that, and I think that it actually is along the lines of what I'm arguing, which is not that it's a fiction. I'm not arguing that it's a fiction. I'm arguing that the interpretation of whether it's a fiction or not is based on your worldview. Andrew may disagree with this. I do think that the worldview is underneath or prior to evaluating evidence. I understand you might disagree with that. That's just where my perspective is coming from. I do think the worldview is first. Like I have to teach, like you were saying, I have 2 kids. I have to teach them to understand what mathematics is before even 2 + 2 = 4 makes sense to them, right? So even something so logical and so easy and so intuitive to us, there's a worldview underlying that. So that's how I believe it. I understand if you don't believe that, then maybe this doesn't make sense to you. But I'm just telling you from my perspective where I come from. And it's just that I think that, okay, if the worldview is first, what is the worldview that I'm going to adopt, and then evaluate evidence based on that worldview? Which is the best worldview that I can adopt? And again, I'm not trying to ignore evidence. I think that the evidence is after the worldview. That's just where I come from.
So let me ask you. That's okay. So that's really super important, because I was a Christian for years and years and years. And like you, one of my pursuits in college was theology, right? So I was the only guy on campus with a double major, theology and computer science. I was the weirdest cat on the farm, let me tell you.
That is an interesting combination.
It's ultimately probably what walked me out of Christianity. But for a long time, I believed exactly as you do, that there was a literal Jesus, and he was not only resurrected, but he ascended. Because after all, we talk a lot about Jesus' resurrection, but if there was no ascension in Acts chapter 1, then the whole story still breaks down, right? It doesn't matter if he was resurrected if there was no ascension. So here's the thing. There was evidence that caused me to reassess my worldview. And that is where I think, so I agree with both you and Matthew. There's completely just pushback to say that when we have adopted a worldview, the first thing we do when we encounter evidence is interpret that evidence with that lens. But more what I was trying to say, and I think the examples worked well enough is there should be evidence that causes us to reassess the things that we think, the things that cause our instinctual reactions. And I went through those and my instinctual reactions changed.
Yeah. I think that there are definitely things like when I say worldview, it could mean a number of different things, actually,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So, like, and I would say that there's probably layers of it, and some are deeper and some are not as deep, right? But even the idea of just that there is such thing as evidence is part of our worldview, I feel like. So something that basic, you know. So I think that there are different levels that can be challenged. And what I'm trying to get at is just that I do think that different people, like for example, different cultures just react very, very differently. And I think there is evidence for this to the same pieces of evidence, right? For example, obviously like mask wearing, right? In America, we have two different worldviews that are reacting very differently to that same piece of data, right?
Yeah.
So what is the amount of data that would take someone from that worldview to completely change and challenge that worldview? I don't think it's just the data, is what I'm saying. Sometimes it is a little bit of data that will trigger it. Sometimes there's a lot of data, but usually you have to be in the cultural environment that will allow that data to challenge your worldview. Again, this is like a generalization or whatever, but I think there is some research that kind of supports this. And I mean, you can just see it from different, your own different experiences, right? So like if I grew up in like the South, I would have a different worldview than I do now. I would probably evaluate.
You certainly would.
Right. If I grew up, I'm ethnically Chinese, actually, right? But if I grew up in China, I would have a very different worldview about what is my individual rights. I probably wouldn't think I had any individual rights. I would think that's BS. Actually, I've had conversations with people, and you can't get through to them about individual basic human rights, right? They just don't understand that. So I do think they're mixed. They are definitely mixed. But what I guess where we could kind of maybe, if we could try to agree, it would be just that. Okay, I think one is prior to the other. Maybe you don't see that, but would you say that there is some mixing going on there? It's not completely objective, our evaluation of evidence. Would you be able to do that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Look, I don't have any problem with anything you said, and hopefully not pushing back in the wrong way. I think what I'd say now is, so I agree. Look, it took me, sorry. There are three thoughts there. I'm going to choose one for you guys, and we'll go with that. So it took me 15 years to find my way out of Christianity after I ultimately decided that there were problems. Okay, so that's one thing. But second, and I think most important, you're right that worldviews come from all over the place. And that your geography, the nature of your relationships, possibly your education, your socioeconomic condition, all those things figure into your worldview. But what that tells me is worldview is not a particularly good way to make decisions. It's like saying I make decisions based on faith, or I make decisions based on how I feel. These things aren't particularly good predictors of outcome. Mm. And so I think that's a really big problem, is if it's true that our worldview just comes from, sorry, that was overly reductive. It is true, rather than if it's true, it is true that our worldviews come from where we are and all of the other conditions. I completely agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But because there's such wide variation, I suspect that doesn't make for a good way to determine the outcome that you want.
Interesting. So I think I'm still, when I say worldview, I am talking about even a little bit more basic of a level, and I'll give you an illustration of this. But there was there's like those visual tricks, I guess, or visual illusions that people they have that looks like two lines, and then one has arrows point on the edge of them, and then one has arrows
Right,
the
the
other
blue
way.
dress, yellow dress thing, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So there's stuff like that, right? And it's
Sure.
interesting because they did studies on that, and like Western people actually are tricked more often by those visual illusions than people in other parts of the world. Eastern hunter-gatherer societies, they're like hardly ever fooled by those visual illusions. And it's interesting, and I can show you the link to some of that research, but it's interesting because when we look at something that's so basic, we're not doing we don't feel like we're doing any processing of that information. We just see it is there. That's it, right? But it kind of shows that because Western people even literally see the world differently and they're making logical deductions, that line is longer than the other line because of these arrows, right?
Yeah,
and it's so intuitive that I think it shows that on such a basic level, there is worldview operating.
I think there's a better example than that, actually, Andrew. And
really?
this might help you. Yeah, it's these sometimes you get color patches where you'll have squares of a single color on a piece of paper, but one of those blocks of squares will be just subtly fainter than all the others, but they're all the same color. And similar experiments have been done with that kind of thing. And I'm really loose on the details of which nationality. It might have even been a tribe where let's just say that the color is green, because again, this detail is escaping my memory. Let's just say that the color is green, and so they're all the same shade of green except for one square, and it's very, very subtly a different shade of green. And because we have words in our language in English for different shades of green, we see that one of them, if we just get it at the right angle, yes, one of them is just a subtly different shade. There are cultures where there isn't the demarcation between darker and lighter. And in those cultures, they don't see the shading difference. And so this same color patch has been shown to them. And because their language doesn't allow for there being different shades, their brain doesn't register when they look at the patch that one of them is a different shade, even though you show it to a European person and they can see. So I think that's what you're driving at, Daniel.
Yeah, I think that does. Yeah,
I think that's a problem, though. I think that's a problem rather than a feature, because what you basically described, as far as I can tell, is if we could convince people in hunter-gatherer societies to spend a lot of time making optical illusions relevant to their societies, then they would pick up and see their optical illusions as often as everybody else. But because they're not Westerners, they don't see Western optical illusions very well. So I'm not sure that what you've described is a feature. It sounds like a bug.
Possibly, but I think that doesn't change the message that Daniel's trying to say, because what I'm describing is because of the culture which they have, the language that they use, that they evolve in, their brain just doesn't have the capability of what's the word I'm looking for, of differentiating different shades of a particular color, whereas other cultures do. But I think what Daniel's driving at is that kind of feature arrives before you've got a worldview.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let me just ask you both. Are you saying, so at this point we've been talking about optical illusions. So let's move back to something that is not an optical illusion. Are you suggesting that the physical laws of the universe change based on your worldview? So, for instance, if I don't think that battery acid will harm me, if I drink it, will it actually not harm me? If I am absolutely convinced that I can run off Niagara Falls in a barrel without being harmed, if I perform that experiment 1,000 times, am I not going to be harmed because of my belief? So, I'll leave it there.
The physics
doesn't. One of you...
No, the physics doesn't change, obviously, but to make it more relevant to what we're discussing, if you've got somebody from a culture who can't see a square from a row of 4 squares where one of them is a slightly different shade of green, if his brain can't process that difference, what evidence do you use to convince that person that one of those squares is actually a different shade of green?
All right, but I don't think that's actually the question on the table. I think the question that we're actually asking.
Let me try and do it differently. Okay, so sorry to interrupt you there, Andrew.
No, it's okay.
Let's just say that Daniel is trying to convince us, and before we had the whole mess up with the microphone, we were talking a little bit about Peter walking on water on the Lake of Galilee. Now, Daniel accepts that is an event that actually happened, and we don't. And let's just assume that it's a feature of our brain that does that. How does Daniel convince us that that event was an historical fact when our brains are not capable of accepting that event is an historical fact? And so that's how I'm trying to roll that back to the color green. You and I could see a single square that's a different shade of green out of a row of 4, but somebody in this other culture that I referenced can't. How do you show him? How do you prove to him that shade of green is different when he can't process the fact that it is different? How does Daniel convince us that Peter walked on water when our brains are incapable of processing the fact that Peter did actually walk on water?
Okay, so 2 things. First of all, I'm not questioning whether someone can have a wrong idea. I'm not even questioning whether it's possible for somebody to be so doxastically closed to an idea that they can't be convinced in the face of evidence where they should be convinced. But that's not actually, in my view, what we're trying to assess. What we are trying to assess is whether a physical thing is possible. Now, I may not accept that physical thing happened, but I don't agree that the 3 of us, after quite a bit of conversation at this point, are in a place where none of us could accept the thing. And that is why I don't think the optical illusion particularly attains. So we are in the process of talking about, because we do use the same tools, we've all acknowledged that we are willing to explore ideas with science, as well as with what other tools we bring to the table. And so the question is, because we all accept those things, how do we adjudicate whether a thing happened or not?
Yeah, I would say, I think, Matt, you are on the right track of what I'm trying to argue, basically. But I do see, Andrew, you're saying that those things are, it seems like, pretty different, like an optical illusion versus just straight, did something happen or not, right? Is that what you're saying?
I am questioning the reasonableness of trying to compare the resurrection to an optical illusion. Yeah. Because if the best that you have is the comparison of the resurrection to the optical illusion, then I think we're at a place where we're so far apart that it's not possible to carry on a meaningful conversation. But I didn't get that impression, because we do all accept that there are tools of objectivity that we all use. So if we're backing off of that, then okay, maybe we can't get there. But using an optical illusion to suggest that I wouldn't accept the resurrection based on the tools that I use is just flatly false.
I wouldn't make a direct comparison between the optical illusion and the resurrection. What I think the optical illusion does illustrate my point in principle, though. What I mean by that is, prior to this optical illusion tangent, I guess, but it was a good one, I was trying to show that there's just levels of degree of difference for evaluating evidence, right? How strong does it need to be, right? And so I don't think that the difference is in the matter of like completely 2 different types of things. It's just like, if my worldview allows me to just lower those levels of evidence just a little bit, we could probably be very similar on a lot of different things. So I'm not saying that we're very dissimilar in how we use those objective tools, right? But it's just that the objective tools, they're not one-to-one. They're not exact, right? So mine are going to be a little bit different than yours are. It's going to allow me, and be based on worldview, it's going to allow me to accept a little bit different things than you are, right? And so it's just, and again, like I said before, if I saw the video that your family member sent you, I probably would have laughed at or not laughed at it, but like been skeptical.
Been a little dismissive, sure.
Yeah, so I don't think our worldviews are actually completely different. I think actually maybe I have a closer worldview to you than maybe you even do to the rest of your family. I don't know, right?
Right.
But
So
I'm
that's
saying,
why I think the optical illusion doesn't particularly attain, and why I think that we are in a place where we should be able to compare because we have similar enough worldviews and decide whether this thing is actually a reasonable conclusion. And not only that, but decide where our differences are and why we have them.
yeah, I would say that I think the worldview does influence it to a degree, not to does it exist or not. It's just the degree that it influences it. So I think there are a lot of different shades of degree here, is what I'm saying, that the worldview can influence in our processing of truth, for example.
Sure.
Okay.
So I agree 100%. Now, where does that leave us? How do we get to the truth of the resurrection?
Yeah, so it's my argument, and again, I don't expect you to accept this at all. I'm mainly just telling you the way I think, and
sure,
maybe you would like to accept it, but I would be a lot but I doubt it. Okay, so
well, I used to. I mean, I've been there. I have that T-shirt.
Yeah, the way I would say it is, okay, let's say there's something. Let's say there's a pill out there that can cure cancer, and I have cancer. Let's say that, okay? But the scientific evidence is that there's two camps. One is arguing that this pill is purely placebo, right? Another camp is arguing that it legitimately works, right? From my perspective, if I have a higher level of evidence that's required to take this pill, then I may think it's a placebo. I may not think it works, and I won't take the pill, right? But if I lower my evidence requirement a little bit, then I could take the pill and I could be cured. Okay, but let's say both camps agree that whether it's a placebo effect or whether it's a real effect, either one, there is evidence that the pill does cure the cancer. Let's say both camps agree that. Okay, so then, from my perspective, the truth of whether or not it's a placebo or an actual cure starts to matter less. You see, I'm not saying that that the evidence doesn't matter at all. I'm saying that the evidence matters less, and I'd be more likely to take that pill. And so that's the argument that I would make for the resurrection, Christianity, and miracles, is that it's just, and this is subjective, of course, right? So that's why I don't expect you to accept it at all. But I think it gives you a perspective on life that's amazing.
But no, but it doesn't. but it doesn't, because the cancer that you're trying to tell me is going to be cured is the cancer of death, not the cancer of a good life. And so when you say I got this resurrection and it benefits me all these ways, well, okay, fine. First, let me say that I would never suggest to you, under any circumstances, even at my worst moments. Well, I don't know, Matthew might disagree with that. Even at my worst moments, I don't think I would ever tell you that you can't live a good life under Christianity, right? That is not what I'm saying. The cancer that we are talking about when we talk about the resurrection, and we talked about this right up at the front of the show, is not only the resurrection, but the ascension. Because that is the thing that Christians are pinning their hopes on. Not that Jesus was resurrected and we get to live a good life here, and no. The cancer is the cancer of death. And in order to say that this resurrection does something, you'd have to convince me that it does away with the cancer of death.
So wait, can you you're saying that my example of cancer doesn't I'm a little confused, sorry.
Well, so sure. The placebo here, you said, maybe you wouldn't take the pill. But that's not, whether you would take the pill or not is not actually the group that we're talking about. The group that we're talking about is those that take the pill and are cured and those that are not cured. That's what we're trying to decide. We're trying to decide not if you don't take the pill. We're not trying to decide, well, maybe we are. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're deciding if you don't take the pill, can you get rid of cancer? But the cancer in this case, if I don't take the pill, is what happens eternally. So the cancer here is death. Okay. So now that we're talking about the cancer here being going to heaven or going to hell, because that's what we're talking about when we talk about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. The cancer is you don't want to go to hell. Now, make the placebo example fit that.
Okay.
How do you measure whether somebody gets cancer or not in this placebo?
Yeah, so I think that, okay, this is, again, my perspective, and it's probably not the same as all Christians. But the way I interpret, and I think this is accurate. Obviously, I would argue for my interpretation of the Bible over some of theirs, but
shocking.
I think the heaven and hell thing is a little bit overblown. Okay, so I'm not saying that there's no heaven. I'm not saying that there's no hell. I'm not saying that. But when the Bible talks about eternal life, especially like we're talking about the Gospel of John and signs and wonders, you use the word eternal life often. It's not talking just about quantity of life, like how long you're going to live or forever or not. It's also talking about quality of life, and there's scholarship that whatever. But that's kind of my perspective too. So it's not just that you can measure. It's not about, hey, how do you measure if you lived or died at the end of your life? That's not what I wouldn't put that as the analogy with cancer. I would actually just say, hey, look at it. Are Christians happier? And they may not be. I'm not saying that they necessarily are, right? But I'm saying, I'm saying, what is the belief system? Choose a belief system that doesn't contradict your evidence, right? But choose the best belief system possible that will make you the happiest, or that will give you whatever you value. Maybe it's not happiness, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's love, right? What is the belief system that will get you to love, if that's your value, right? Obviously, we don't throw out evidence. I'm not saying throw out evidence, but there's a variety of belief systems that will allow you to interpret the evidence. Choose the belief system that's going to give you the most positive results. I think for me, that's Christianity. For you, maybe it's Buddhism. Maybe it's a secular belief system. Whatever that belief system is, that's actually more important, And I think that miracles, and this is going back to the miracle conversation, I think for me, and this is subjective, I fully admit, for me, a miracle framework, it makes me happier, right? A miracle, and I don't think it contradicts evidence. That's another, again, I want to keep emphasizing that within your level of evidence, right? I can't believe anything, right? But within that framework, miracles give me such a better outlook on life, right? It allows me to be grateful and have gratitude. And there's research that gratitude is so important, right? It allows me to have those. It allows me to, just have the positive, have hope, have, all these things, right? And I don't think it contradicts evidence. And so that would be my reason for adopting this framework, a miracle framework. And then from that framework, I interpret the resurrection and different events. I see that, hey, it's plausible. So that's kind of how I would lay it out. Does that make any sense?
Sure. Matthew, what do you think? I have rambled on for 30 minutes. It's your turn.
It does kind of make sense. I'd like to pick up on one thing you said, Daniel, and ask a question on that. You kind of said something about happiness possibly being a criteria for accepting worldview. If you were to do a straw poll or survey of Christians from around the world and ask them, are they Christians because it makes them happier? Do you honestly think that there are many who would answer yes to that, or would they prefer to answer yes to a different question?
That's difficult for me to answer because I don't know a lot of people. I think, to be honest with you, in the Western world, I can't even say the Western world, maybe in America, and I can't even say that, maybe in California, from the people I know, I don't think that they would say that, right? I think they are saying, hey, based on evidence, blah, 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 right? But I do think that, again, people are generally not aware of their own worldviews. So they don't understand how that's coming in.
Yeah, I can accept that about the worldview thing, and people accept what's comfortable and then look for another reason to justify it when pushed.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can accept that. Yeah.
So with worldview, Matthew, I'm sorry, you feel free to fuss at me. I will accept it gracefully.
Just talk. I'll interrupt you if I want to.
Okay, please do. So, Daniel, if you had something that you genuinely thought was a miracle, so I'm not going to pick one because I hate it when miracle conversations, you pick some cherished thing, right? And then it becomes a bone of contention. So pick something small in your head and make it something that's not real, right? So not something that you've experienced. You've got this thing and you think it was a miracle and that fits your worldview, right? But somehow in the course of time, it's revealed that thing is not a miracle, right? It just works out with, maybe somebody said, oh yeah, I was there and this is the thing I did. And it looked like a miracle from your perspective because you didn't have all the information, right? Would you still be just as happy to call it a miracle because that fits your worldview? Or would you no longer call that thing a miracle because even though it fit with your worldview, you'd rather know the truth than continue to think of it as a miracle?
I think it depends. Okay, so I think in our previous conversation that got lost, I defined a miracle as two things, right? One, I don't understand it, or humans don't understand it, right? Two, it has meaning behind it, right? So I think if I believe something was a miracle, I would be assigning meaning to it also. So it's not just that something miraculous happened, but also that there's some type of meaning for my life, right? So if you're saying that if someone explained to me that this miracle didn't actually happen and showed me how it didn't actually happen, that's something that may take away my, now I understand how it happened, right? But I think it could still possibly retain the meaning aspect, right?
So can't you make anything a miracle just by assigning arbitrary meaning to it?
You could.
I mean, that doesn't. So I'm completely willing to let you define miracle however you want. We're not using the word in the same way.
Yes,
and so I think that's going to be, it's okay. I'm going to try to use it the way you do with the understanding that the way I use miracle, it is in the context of spiritual signs, wonders, and miracles. Oh, that wasn't in this recording. Okay, all right. The New Testament, I think, talks about miracles and wonders and spiritual signs in a specific way that indicates that it's a breaking of natural law, turning water to wine, moving a mountain instantaneously, resurrecting the dead. These are things that are outside human capability in the way that the New Testament lays them out. So whenever I say miracle, I will be talking about miracle in that context because it doesn't take meaning to call it a miracle. If by miracle you mean that it's an event and you find meaning in it and therefore it's miraculous, okay, but can't you do that with any event and call everything a miracle?
Okay, so yeah, I would agree that that you could, yeah, definitely. Depending on your worldview, though, right? So again, I don't want to throw away evidence completely. That's not what I'm saying. I think you have to take into consideration of evidence. In certain respects, we are mentally incapable of throwing away evidence, right? So I'm not saying that it doesn't have anything that you can just adopt any worldview and anything will become a miracle. And when I went specifically for me, what the meaning has to be is that the meaning is that it's from God, right? Or something is from God. That's obviously just very specific to me, my Christian worldview. Like if you're talking about Buddhist or Islam or some other, they might have a slightly different definition of what miracle is, or a very different definition. But for me, that's where the meaning comes from, right?
So how do you know it's a miracle if you self-assign the meaning? how do you know it's from God?
So that's the thing, is I don't think I'm self-assigning the meaning. Obviously, from the perspective of worldview, if you're choosing your own worldview, it sounds like you're self-assigning. But I don't think that that's what I mean by worldview, right? I think that it's the worldview is a method of evaluating evidence that is not, it's subject. There is some subjectivity there, but you don't choose it. It's very difficult for you to choose your own worldview like that, right? So I don't think that I can possibly just, if I see something that I don't think is actually a miracle, go, okay, oh, it's a miracle now. Like, I don't think I can do that, right? Like, that's not what I'm trying to describe here. What I'm trying to say is that it's the method of looking at life, right? Of saying, hey, there's a possibility for miracles. Hey, there's a possibility that God intervenes in life. Hey, there's a possibility that God loves me and he cares about me enough to do things in my life that will show that, right? So if I have that worldview, there are certain things that are going to happen to me that I could say, that's so unlikely. That's so coincidental. Could that be from God? And from at that point, I think the evidence is like, well, it was very unlikely, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a miracle. But then if you when faced with that, my worldview would tend to choose that it was from God or that it was a miracle, simply because that's my worldview. That's where I'm coming from. So it's not that but there are definitely events where people would tell me this is a miracle, this happened, and I'll be like, I really don't think so, based on the evaluation of the evidence. I will evaluate evidence like that, right? I will try to use scientific evidence to see, did that actually happen, right? So, for example, your video that your family member sent you, I would critique that. I would say, yeah, why is that person standing right in the middle? But then at the same time, if they give all these good answers for that, I would tend to believe them.
Why would you critique it though? Because what it sounds to me, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if this video came to you at a particularly opportune time, maybe you just need a confirmation, you're struggling with something with your children or. No, well, look, I don't want to overly emotional. I don't want to create a bunch of emotion around it. So maybe the video comes to you at an opportune time where you just need something that feels confirmatory, right? Why would you ever, if your worldview is to accept miracles, why would you ever critique one?
Well, there is an element of, is this like what we've been talking about? I don't think we disagree on this. What is reality, right?
What? I'm sorry.
What is reality? What is actually happening? What's the truth? What's the facts, right? So I think that there's both the element of facts and the element of maybe faith involved, right? So what I'm saying is I'm trying to find a good balance between the two. And so you're right that maybe there's not a great line that I'm like, this is the most accurate, perfect line between faith and skepticism, right? But what I'm saying is that there's somewhere in there that I'm trying to land, because like I said before, skepticism is very useful. Skepticism is very good in the right context, right? And so I don't want to get rid of my skepticism. I don't think it's good to get rid of your skepticism, but I don't think it's good to go too far in that end either. So I'm trying to find a balance. And I fully admit to you that it's not like an objective place where I can say this is the perfect spot between skepticism and faith. Right. But
yeah, I don't think we're using skepticism the same way either, because you say you don't want to be too skeptical, and I think we're talking about some sort of hyper skepticism, where you say you've gone too far, and that's not the way I'm using the word, but it's not important at the moment. But I do want to point out that I'm not appealing to the kind of hyper skepticism that suggests. I'm just trying to find a place where the idea of faith legitimately plays a part in adjudicating not how we think the world works or how we want it to work.
Yes.
But how it does work.
Yeah, I think we're in the same place. We're really very similar. It's just that because we know that hyper skepticism, we don't want to be there, right? We both agree with that, right?
Sure.
we both agree that, hey, just believing anything for just the sake of belief, we don't want to be there either, right? I agree with that. So we're trying to find somewhere in the middle. And what I'm saying is there an objective place where you could say this is the most accurate balance between skepticism or hyper skepticism and hyper, I don't know, fideism? I don't know what you might call it.
I'd like to propose a mental image for you too, which I think might be helpful in that. So rather than a straight line, let's imagine a dial, like a fuel gauge in a car. And one end, you've got everything is wrong. You reject absolutely everything that's told to you. And at the other end is everything is true. You accept without question everything that is told to you. And it sounds like we all agree that those two extremes, neither of those are reasonable places to be. So the question then becomes, at which point in between those two lines is the most reasonable place to land? It's possibly not dead center. So where isn't it? And it sounds like if we were to place ourselves on that dial, Daniel, you'd place yourself closer to the believing end than Andrew and myself, and you would potentially be uncomfortable with how far we are towards the questioning end. Is that a reasonable picture to paint?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
So I guess, man, I'm going to do it again, and you guys are going to get tired of me if you haven't already. But it seems to me that how we get placed on that line, where we end up, fundamentally has to do with what tools we use to get to the bottom of how the world works. And so I can say for myself only this. I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. And I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible because in the end, I believe that is the best way for all of us to get along in the world we have, because I don't think there's a cure for cancer. No. And now, on the other hand, if somebody can show me the cure for cancer, it's okay. I should quit being hyperbolic with the listeners because they may be confused. As far as I can tell, there's no afterlife. Okay. And so the best way for me to understand the world is not through the idea of some miracles that make me feel better, but to actually understand the world around me and to feel better as a result. Now, on the other hand, if there were some way to peel back the veil and discover that there was an eternal life, then we could objectively know, well, it might not be objective. I mean, I can be tricked, right? This is the human problem. But if somebody could show me that there's this objective afterlife, then we'd have a different kind of story. But until then, we, as far as I can tell, we agree that knowing how the world works is important, and that's how I find my placement on that line. Now that may just be me, doing me, and there it is. So
I've got a question to ask to both of you. Given that we all pretty much agree that wherever we place ourselves on that line, it's not going to be the perfect place where we can, with absolute certainty, discern between what's true and what's not. So it means we have to choose at which point, which side we err. So the question to both of you is, what mistake would you rather make? Would you rather falsely believe something to be true, or would you rather falsely reject something as false? Which is the better way to swing? Which is the better mistake to make? Because you have to make one of them.
Oh, you had to go with that last sentence, did you? Because I was just abstaining from.
There is no middle ground. You're going to make a mistake, and it's going to be one of those two things. Which is the better mistake to make?
Daniel, do you want it first, or do you want me to?
I'll go. I can go. Okay. I don't want to do either. Just caveat this: I really, really don't want to believe in anything false, and I also don't want to reject anything that's true. But I guess, I mean, I am the one arguing for faith on this podcast, right? So I guess I would choose that side. And only because I think there is some evidence that shows that in our world, and I'm just saying our world, meaning like a post-Enlightenment, Western, whatever framework, there's a little bit of evidence that kind of shows that we do. I feel like we need a little bit more. I know that's super vague, but it's like, if you've heard of like the, I don't know, the hedonic treadmill, where it's
No,
like,
I don't think so.
I think some psychologists, they measure like happiness level, basically going back to the happiness thing, right? Of people, and they chart it out over time, and then I think they did some people who won the lottery, and if you won the lottery, there would be a huge spike in your happiness level, but after a few months, it would go back to the exact same baseline as before, so the happiness didn't last. And then they did the same thing for people who got into an accident and became quadriplegics, right? And there was a huge dip in happiness level. Like people became depressed. But then for most of the people, not everyone obviously, but for most people, it would kind of just go back to the baseline level of happiness. They would go back to where they were before. And so it kind of shows that for human beings, we're very adaptable in terms of happiness. But for me, the question I would want to ask is, how can I raise my baseline level of happiness? How can I raise that permanently? And it basically is a lot of the, people, the psychologists talk about gratitude, different things like that. But what it comes down to for me is like these events, becoming quadriplegic or winning the lottery, they have to be interpreted in order to raise your or help you with happiness or not. So I want to interpret the world in a way that will do that. And will reflect my values. I think I've said this before. Love, happiness, truth is one of those values. Unfortunately, like I can't just throw that away. I think that faith does sometimes help us actually get to truth. And so that's kind of where I would kind of lean. Again, this is a super difficult question. And if I could just say neither, I would say that. So that's how I would answer it, I guess.
Okay, so there are metrics for human thriving. And Daniel, in this place, you and I are in lockstep, or at least I think we are. I mean, you tell me in a moment. But there are 5 or 7 metrics for human thriving. I was familiar with them a while back. I can't name them all now, but achievement, emotional relationship, happiness, there are several more, right? So Daniel, earlier you were asking me about dimensions. And when I make a decision, what dimensions have to be fulfilled and to what extent, that kind of idea. We have metrics for human thriving, like achievement and education and happiness, personal relationships, all that kind of thing. Like I said, there are 5 or 7 of them. If the listeners are interested, they can look up human thriving, and the first couple of hits we'll give them to you. So if I had to make a mistake, and if I knew that I believe something that isn't true, or I don't believe something that is true, and so I get to pick one of them, I would absolutely do what you would have suggested, or that you suggested, Daniel. It wouldn't be all about happiness, but what it would be aimed at would be human thriving, which I really think is what you meant by happiness, is accepting all of those dimensions of what it means to be a human and trying to maximize them all. So if that's what you meant, we're in lockstep. And I would not only do that for myself, hopefully I would be unselfish enough that even if it didn't maximize them for me, I would make the decision where it maximized them for everybody else. And I don't know that I'm that self-aware, but hopefully I would, right? And so I would try to consider. So this is the little white lie problem. Would I tell a little white lie if in the end it resulted in somebody having a better outcome? And I guess the answer is yes, right? So Matthew, I don't know if that got to the heart of the question. If it didn't, push me, and I'll try to give a more relevant
that was
answer.
right. It was more for the pleasure of watching you two squirm, really. if I'm really honest.
Scotsman.
Yep.
I think you accomplished that goal.
Yeah. Yeah, I think these questions are interesting questions to tackle because it's when we're analysing the the base of our worldviews, and how we analyze and how we accept information, and how we assess whether or not, or how we decide how to assess whether or not to accept something as true. I think these kinds of questions are quite useful. And something else that you mentioned brought something else to my mind, and that's about cognitive dissonance. The discomfort of seeing something of seeing evidence that strongly suggests that something that we hold dearly to be true is actually not true, or it could be vice versa. I'm familiar with that feeling, and it can be a very deeply uncomfortable feeling, and challenges to our worldviews when they hit the core of our being can be a deeply unpleasant, deeply unhappy place to be. And typically as humans we walk away from those. And I think one of the things that I've recognized in myself since I've stopped being a Christian, which was about 12 years ago now, I almost welcome that kind of feeling, because I don't see it as a challenge to my happiness and my well-being. I see it as an opportunity for me to have a corrective movement on what I believe. And the result will be that, as Andrew said, I believe more things to be true. And I just wondered if that was something that you were familiar with. Did that spiel make any sense to you, Daniel? And do you feel differently about that at all?
No, I agree with that. Definitely. I do. I think the cognitive dissonance needs to be listened to. Okay, again, I interpret cognitive dissonance probably a little bit differently than you. I experience that. And whenever I experience it, I do interpret it this way. I have to admit, I interpret it as God's telling me something's wrong, right? God's telling me something that I believe is wrong.
Okay.
So obviously that's pretty different maybe than the way you're interpreting it. But I do think we're both interpreting it in like kind of a positive sense. So maybe we can agree on that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I can accept that. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, again, it's interpretive. It's that lens. I admit to you guys, I did have a period in my life where I seriously questioned the truth of the Bible and the gospel and God in general and all that. And I did experience a significant amount of cognitive dissonance. My experience is probably different than your guys's, and I'm not saying mine is better or anything. It's probably worse. But the way more I looked into it, it did completely shift my Christianity. But I found that it was more. I found that I could not. It would create more cognitive dissonance for me to go into complete secular atheist perspective, because of some of the research I was finding, especially in the area of psychology and like some of the things I was telling you, where it's just like if I were to adopt the secular worldview, I know atheism and secular worldview is not the same thing, but if I were to adopt that, I don't have like there's no answers for certain things. And maybe so that's very subjective, right? Obviously, and you probably disagree with that, but there's a lot of like, that's not right either. That feeling on that side, for me, okay. And I know it's not the same for everyone, and so I acknowledge that a lot of us we're just operating on a lot of our feelings of cognitive dissonance, wherever that comes from, right? So, yeah, I guess that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
That's honest of you. I appreciate that.
Thank you for knowing the difference between secular worldview and atheism. We don't always have guests that recognize that. Mostly we do, but thank you for knowing the difference and not just say, well, you're atheist, so of course, because behind that secular thought, there's the humanist thought, right? And not all atheists are humanists, and I could read between all those lines. So thank you for knowing that. Yeah. And Matthew, you've got it back.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a couple of cheeky questions now because we're on the slope down. So I want to throw in some cheeky questions, Daniel. One is there anything in the Bible that you don't accept to be true?
That I don't accept to be true? That's so loaded.
It is. Yeah.
I did not put him up to this, listeners.
I I'm not trying to spring a trap. It is a loaded question. I accept that, but I'm not trying to spring a trap on you. There's nothing else coming. I just wanted just to explore. That was all.
I mean, okay, I have a whole video that I made about the difference between truth and fact. So, like, I kind of differentiate between those two
Interesting.
concepts, right?
Interesting.
So,
Well, you can rephrase the question to be: is there anything in the Bible that you don't accept as a fact? I'm quite happy for you to
yeah.
rephrase it that way, if
So,
that helps.
yes, I do think that if you're viewing the Bible in a factual, let's say, especially from our perspective as modern people, what we consider facts, there are definitely things in the Bible that are not factual, right? So I would say that, yeah. I mean,
Are
I
you
don't have
prepared
to
to
say.
stick your neck out and identify one, or am
Oh,
I
okay.
pushing too far?
I don't think, like, for example, I think, Genesis, most of those things in the first 11 chapters
Right.
would not be factual. I do think they are all 100% true. Again, this is my definition of the two different concepts,
Interesting.
but I don't think they are factual in the way we look. I think there could be core facts that are the basis of Genesis 1 through 11, but I don't think that they were strictly factual in the way that we modern people would consider them factual.
Okay.
Most of those events, most of, like, flood, the creation, Adam and Eve, all that.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. I think the Tower of Babel was probably the biggest problem one for me.
Yeah, Tower of Babel.
When I was, yeah, that one. The flood took a little bit longer for me to unpack, but I think the Tower of Babel was one that probably went first for me. But it was a long time ago. Yeah, that's the obvious place to go in the Bible. Like I say, I won't push it any further. I wasn't trying to spring a trap or anything. And yeah, it's quite a loaded question, potentially a dangerous question to ask. But
It's actually a very dangerous question. Now I'm a heretic towards a lot of people probably think I'm heretic.
You know what? Over here in the UK, the literalists from because accepting those first 11 chapters as literal usually identifies you as a young Earth creationist, although that's not necessarily true. Here in the UK, young Earth creationists are far fewer in number than they are for you. So there's always a home here if there's people beating at your door when they. I did have another question, but it's gone. So I'm sorry. There isn't. The other question I wanted to ask is gone from me now.
So I don't have a lot else. I do want to say, Daniel, that we pushed into a lot of dark corners, and I really, really enjoyed the conversation and how easy it was just to have it where it seemed like nobody had any real skin in the game. I hope it felt that way to you too, because
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Because
were there any questions you wanted to ask us? Sorry, Andrew, I spoke over you.
No, that's right. That's the right question. So,
I guess. I mean, I would say, like, yeah, I love these conversations. If you know me, I just love discussing this stuff. I love talking about this stuff. So, often online, I think it can get a little dicey, and so I appreciate, like, just having actual voices, being able to talk, because I think people often, I say a lot of things. I say a lot of things in a strong way, but I'm generally cheerful about it, but it doesn't come across online. So sometimes people misinterpret me. So I'm really glad for this format where I can laugh while I'm saying
we both have the same experience online.
Yeah.
I can say that we would both have that same report, because when you're online, you tend to make declarative statements, right?
Yes.
And no matter how many emojis you follow a declarative statement, you're the guy shouting in the room that you're right?
Yes,
You can put a smiley behind it all you want, but then you're just shouting and being snarky, like, haha, I'm right. So yes, the online format's not particularly good.
Right. I've got something for you too, which will make you both laugh, cry. I did a Google search for the head and neck treadmill, Daniel, just so I could just get a good breeze on what it was. The sample graph that it's thrown out to me has 2 up points and 2 low points, and the lowest of the 2 low points says Trump re-elected.
Oh man, that's a bit of a low point, I would say.
Yeah, man, and You see, there can be no more happiness from here. I mean, all the happiness for the rest of it just got sucked out, and and now I don't have any choice but to say, yeah, and he's going to get reelected because he's messing with the post office, and they're not going to get their friend. I mean, thanks, Matthew. Thanks very much.
That's right. Well, you could always take the Belarus response, couldn't you?
Well, yeah, okay, all right. May Boris Johnson forever be with you. No, look, look. So I still don't know what this is, Matthew. I mean, so Daniel said it. You looked it up. I am still at a loss. What is this thing that you guys are talking about?
So the hedonic treadmill. It's basically where you have a baseline of happiness, and good things will make you happier. Low things will make you lower, like the whole lockdown and job threats and those kind of things. Those are low points which will reduce your core happiness. But then in amongst all of that, there'll be other moments of good things. Extra time with those we love. We may have a birthday and we'll get phone calls from people we love, and we'll have an excellent podcast with some cool dude in California, and that will make us feel good as well. And then there'll be an average between those points, and that average is your baseline happiness. And so the hedonic treadmill is that baseline is pretty much flat, and your ups and lows will be either side of that, but that will be essentially a flat thing. And obviously, if that's dipping down, that's obviously a really bad thing.
I was pretty sure the hedonic treadmill was what Atlas experiences in hell, right? He carries the rock up the hill and it rolls down, and he has to go down and get the rock and carry it back up. I was pretty sure that was a hedonic treadmill.
That could be related, actually. I think the concepts are pretty. Yeah, I think so, actually.
I made it. Oh no, it rolled down. I made it. So that was what popped into my mind the first time.
You see,
what is this thing?
When people come up with that story, I always get that scene from The Mission. Have you guys seen that film?
I don't think so.
No.
Oh, there's it's years old. Anyway, there's a scene in The Mission where a guy he's got some penance that he needs to do, so he's carrying this sack, this string bag, like a sports string bag, but it's absolutely huge, and it's got all these pots and pans and bits of metal and stuff, and it's a huge thing. It's practically the size of himself, and he's carrying up this hill with this group of people, and it's strapped to his shoulders, and everybody's walking up, and they're walking up this hill through trees and through brush, and it's pouring down with rain, and they're all deeply uncomfortable, and it's dark, and they're hungry, and this guy is walking up the hill carrying this huge load as part of his penance, and one of the string lines gets caught on a log, and so he's tugging on this log, and he's tugging, and all the tension in this scene builds at this moment, and he's tugging on this log, and it won't get loosened from the log, and he just keeps pushing, and one of the other guys in the group, who has just looked down on pity on this guy for the entire time that he's been carrying this thing, he just gets so frustrated with the other guy's frustration that he pulls out his machete and he cuts the line, and this stuff just rolls off his shoulder down the hill, and the guy who's been struggling it just stands up straight, looks him in the eye, and then turns around and walks down the hill to get it again.
Oh no. That's terrible.
And yeah, it's you're laughing now, me describing it to you, but you watch the movie and the tension that's building to that moment, and you look at it, and it's not a laughing moment.
No, of course it's not. No.
That's terrible.
So Daniel, Matthew was right, and he asked it a couple of minutes ago, and you might have been processing this a little subconsciously. You've got a couple of guys who are, well, I'm a weak atheist. I don't know what, Matthew, we've been podcasting together for 3 years, and I don't remember whether you are a weak atheist or a strong atheist. So forgive me.
Yeah, I'm middling probably. Just to put it out there, I call myself agnostic atheist because I don't know, therefore I can't believe. But on the Dawkins scale, I would probably put myself at a 6.9.
Yeah, six. Yeah, okay. So we're in the same place roughly, because I'm a weak atheist. I'm not saying there are no gods. I'm saying that the ones that have been presented to me so far. You got a couple of guys on the line, and it has been a genuinely nice conversation. And do you have questions for us? Is there something that feel free to put us on the spot with anything, with ethics. How do we know there's not a God? What do you do about objective versus subjective decision? Phil, what do you do about apparent design? Feel free to ask us any question that you would like, and I should not have loaded that gun for you.
Yeah.
But here you go.
Sure. I guess because I've listened to some of your previous episodes, right? Not all of them, obviously. But correct me if I'm wrong. But your families are both Christian, right? Or your wives are still Christian?
Mine is. Andrew's girlfriend isn't.
That's right. My girlfriend is. Well, she doesn't call herself an atheist, but she doesn't believe in God, and so I think that she's probably as close to agnostic as it is possible to be, while still thinking that the truth can be had, and her actions are based on humanism. So wherever you think that puts her, she makes decisions based largely on the decision points that a humanist would use.
Okay.
But our extended family is all Christian.
So most of the Christians that I'm assuming this again, so correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the Christians that you encounter, like, because you guys asked me that one question about is the Bible completely true or not? Most of the people you would talk to would say that it's completely factual. Like, are they on the more conservative end? Is that accurate?
Boy, mine are. Yeah, mine are literalists.
Oh, okay.
Not for me though, because like I say, here in the UK, that kind of literalism is much less common. So the Christians that I know, I guess there would be more liberal Christians. I suspect very few of them take a young Earth from Genesis creation literally. I imagine. In fact, I of the Christians that I know that I see on a regular basis, I don't think there's a single one of them that questions evolution, for example.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, well, because from my perspective, like, I want one of my main big interests is I want people who, because I know for a fact there are atheists in my church who do not admit it. You know what I'm saying? I know for a fact. I mean, okay, I don't know for a fact, but I highly suspect. Let's just say that. Okay.
Sure.
I feel like there are younger people who are growing up and are questioning their faith. As a pastor, I want to create an environment in the church that says, hey, this is completely fine. This is good. We accept you. We love you. We want you to stay a part of our community. And like, if you don't believe, or you come to that place where you reject, Christianity, or cannot believe, that's not going to compromise our relationship with you. We're still committed to you, like, as family, as church, as all of that. Like, have you experienced like rejection from the church in terms of that, or like ostrich, or just that kind of thing? And how would you help me, I guess, as a pastor, to kind of create that environment that kind of fosters that and says, hey, it's okay for this, that kind of thing? I don't know if you have any advice for me or something.
I've not experienced direct rejection from those I know. My deconstruction experience was a scary experience for me, and there were a lot of people I didn't tell because I didn't know how they would react. But at the tail end of that, my wife and I relocated. So the new location where we now live, and the church that she goes to, everybody knows I'm atheist. None of them knew me as a Christian.
Oh, okay.
And that's a more comfortable experience for me. And I feel accepted by all of them. There are a few individuals who certainly at one point in time saw me as a project, this is somebody I need to make an effort with. I need to get him back on the team, kind of thing. And you know who they are because they're the first people to come up and say hello to you when you walk in through the church door. How they're really enthusiastic about seeing you because they knew I was an atheist. So that puts me off. I don't want to be anybody's project. I think the other thing from going the other way, some of the fear that I've had from Christians close to me is their expression of fear that because I no longer believe and I now consider myself a skeptical atheist, their fear was that I was looking down my nose at them because I now think that they're stupid and they're ridiculous, and I'm just scoffing at them for holding these beliefs that I look down on and consider false. And again, I want to emphasize that certainly with those that I care about, I don't look at them in that way at all, because I don't think that's conducive to a relationship either. So in terms of my advice to you, I think I would say go brave and just say it from the front.
Oh, okay.
Kind of what you just said to us. If you're not a believer, awesome. And try and lay some kind of statement, reassuring both those things, that just because you don't believe doesn't mean you think everybody who does is an idiot. And just because you do believe, it doesn't mean that you need to pity and turn into a project those who don't. We're a family. Let's love and respect each other, and maybe just go brave if you're that sure that there are people out there, and say it outright. You might have to, obviously, your church better than me, but so you might have to pick your moment to say that, and or maybe another way of doing it is have an opportunity for people to have a conversation and a chat about these things, rather than because I imagine yours is a traditional church where you do a sermon to them. Maybe have an opportunity for people to feed back to you thoughts, and so you make it a slightly more personal thing. I don't know if that will actually work in a church setting, but maybe in a small group setting, and try to create an environment where people are comfortable to question some of the things that you've said, and that might just help with the comfort on that. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So you think that just by saying it in a public setting, that helps people?
I think so, but it obviously depends on who it is that you've got. It might, if you've got some people in there who are really fundamentalists or really strong evangelicals, they seem to be the ones who react more negatively to the atheists.
Yeah.
So I obviously, better than me what kind of people, if there are people like that in your church, and they might feel threatened knowing that there's atheists in the church. So it's how you help those people get over it. Because I think it's great that there are atheists that are comfortable going to your church. I think so. I think it will be sad if they're finding they have to pretend not to be atheists. I think that makes me sad.
Yeah, that's the part I'm concerned about too.
Maybe what you need to do is be subtle about it and just slip in suggestions that people are different, and we should welcome people different. But my experience is it's the most negative responses come from the more fundamental ends of Christianity, and I don't know whether it's fear or whether it's something else. Sometimes it feels like a fear reaction, but like I say, it might not be a fear reaction. But yeah, that's where the negative reaction was, and I don't know how to discern what the source of that reaction is.
For me, I think one of the things that you can do is try to point out for the atheists and for the fundamentalists in your congregation that there are some points of agreement, because there are good atheists. Well, if you accept the view that there are good atheists, then here are some things that we would agree on. I wouldn't harm your children under any circumstances, nor do I believe you would harm mine.
Yeah.
I wouldn't steal from you if I were in your home any more than I think you would steal from me. I wouldn't invite your wife into a compromising circumstance any more than I think you would my girlfriend. And while we might, and so the list can go on, right? But the question ultimately doesn't have to be about where we get those views. As long as you think the atheists in your church are equally committed to their view, wherever they get it from,
interesting. Okay.
then what you have is the foundation for a relationship where you can discuss things openly. By the way, I think that's what we did here successfully on this show, right? Is that we just accepted that nobody was here to do anything other than have a nice conversation and compare notes, and we were able to do that with in a quite pleasant way. And if you talk about atheism in your church, and you point out that it is possible, maybe not perfectly in the biblical sense, because one aspect of being good is believing in God, and and the whole canon of Scripture, right? However you gloss that in your sermons, but if you can get to a place where you can say, we don't all get our values the same way, but we all share strong values, and those values, those core issues, we treat the same. Then you have a way for the conversation to open up. And I think Matthew's right. I think you just got to go at it head on. And that's my 2 cents, or my 47 cents, or whatever.
I've just had an idea which you can treat with whatever level of respect you feel is appropriate. But go out into your community and go and find another group, either whether it's California atheists or a humanist group, or somebody who has got a secular worldview where when they meet and they talk, whether it's skeptics in the pub or something like that, and pick someone who you can have a conversation with that's on a similar level with the kind of conversation we've had for the last couple of hours, and bring them into a church service and have a public conversation in your church in front of your congregation. Because then you're introducing somebody who could be atheist, who so in a scenario which is home to your congregation, and have that conversation and demonstrate to your congregation that these conversations are possible in a non-threatening manner, and that will probably help both sides in your congregation. That those who might feel threatened or those who are uncomfortable in presence of atheists might feel more relaxed, and those who are atheists in your congregation who are hiding it might feel, what, actually maybe I can be a little bit more open about this.
Yeah, that's really good, actually. Yeah,
and do it. I'll tell you what.
The pastor at I just got to throw this one in. The pastor at my wife's church, whenever I go into the church, and I go about twice a year. It'll be Christmas and then some other event through the year. And every time I walk into the church, and I walk into the sanctuary, and he'll come and greet me and say, "You still haven't burst into flames, then?" And that's the line we have, and that's the joke we share. And it's great.
You just tell him, "I am the flame." I'll tell you what, Daniel. If you are doing any of these kinds of things with an online component these days, where some people are joining through Zoom or Skype or whatever, as well as meeting in person, I'll come.
Oh, okay.
I'll be there. I'll happily be. Well, I don't know if you'd call me a polite atheist, but I'll show up if you want.
Yeah.
No, you are.
Yeah, actually,
you.
I mean, because presumably you're doing some kind of Zoom meetings in your church. So if you want to do an Ask an Atheist Anything section, on a Zoom call or something like that, that could be a really good fun thing to do, actually.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, we would show up and let you guide the questions so that it doesn't so that it doesn't get out of hand, because the goal here for Matthew and I, and I think we might not have said it on any of the shows that you've heard, but our goal is community, and not much else, to be honest. We don't monetize our shows. We only do the shows we want to do, and so if you want a couple of atheists to come around, and for you to be in full control, where it's not like there's some risk of them trying to hijack the conversation in some nefarious way, I think we'd both come.
Okay, yeah, I might actually take you up on that. I have to figure it out. But yeah, I think that's interesting, because I didn't ever thought about that. And I think in general in the past, I have to admit, I don't think I ever really was negative toward atheists or anything, but there's always this tone, when you're preaching about, people who believe different things, and I might have been guilty of some of that, in my own preaching, and I don't want that, so I'm trying to figure out how to set a new culture, where we could really be a little bit more open and not and really considering ideas, and just we're people, right? We love each other, we hang out, and I know there's been people who have, not my current church, but the church I grew up in, that have left that church. They never talk to you ever again. And you're like, why? Where'd you go? And it's like, oh, well, I just don't believe it anymore. I'm like, okay, well, does that mean we can't be friends anymore? But they somehow have that feeling. And it might be because of the way I talked in the past. So I don't know. That's why I kind of want to correct,
To that question that you asked us, have we suffered repercussions as a result of no longer being Christians? I live where I live now. I live in a different state, because when I left Christianity, I not only lost my community turned hostile.
Oh, man.
Now, look, so let me say, like I've said before, I'm quite positive it wasn't all them, right?
Yeah.
And it's possible if I went back today, there would be some way to find some neutral ground. I don't think those relationships could ever be repaired. I don't think we could have family dinners together, and because the people I went to church with is frankly a kind of cult, and so we might not ever find common ground either. But the separation was strong enough that for that reason, and the reason that I needed a different start. I needed to play, I needed to go where nobody knew my name, not where everybody did. But it was those things almost in equal measure that that caused me to be where I am now. And or at least that led to where I am now. There were some intermediate stops and whatever, but it's not always that way, and not all churches are that way. And so it's a truth for where I am. On the other hand, Alice and I, my girlfriend and I, were talking about going to a universal Unitarian church.
Oh.
Yeah, well, because I can be an atheist there, and my daughter can still have children to play with. So
yeah.
so there it is. Sorry, I'm rambling too. Matthew, you get the rambling mic back.
Thank you for those questions, actually, Daniel. They were genuinely thoughtful questions, and it had me processing for a bit. So thank you for those. I really appreciate them. Right. So for the wind down, final question of the night for maximum points. Daniel, what is your favorite Bible character? Who is your favorite Bible character? Sorry.
Who's my favorite? I was gonna say Daniel because it's my namesake, but I don't think he actually is.
The whole lion thing didn't do it for you?
I mean, it's pretty good. I like it. But I think I would choose Moses. Just because the story is just awesome. I mean, he's like, hey, what up, Pharaoh? Let my people go. You don't do this. Boom. Some hail on your head. all this kind of stuff. It's pretty.
My snake eats your snake.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and also he's like such a flawed character too. He was a murderer, legit murderer, right? So, that too wrapped into it, I think. Yeah.
That's all. I think that's the first time we've gotten Moses, Matthew.
I think every character that we've had so far has been unique, haven't they?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So
It has, and we've not planned it that way either. So we'll have to see. We're going to have to do a sweepstake, see how far we go until we get a duplicated character, and then we have to do a sweepstake on who that will be. That'll be a good challenge. That's a good. Yeah, Moses is good. Did you guys ever watch the movie The Prince of Egypt?
Yes.
Yeah, I have not.
I've got it on DVD at home, and the reason why I bring it up is that movie brought something out of the Moses story for me that during my Christian years I had never appreciated in all my readings of that story. And that is the fact that Moses would have known intimately the Pharaoh, whether it was his brother or not, or whether it was his father or an uncle or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's a character, an individual who he would have known quite intimately. And I never had got that from reading the Bible. It took watching The Prince of Egypt for that penny to drop for me.
Yeah. If Moses is real, right?
Yes. Well, I wasn't going to go there, but blessings to you for bringing that up. But,
you just want a podcast for 2 more hours, don't you?
Well, and the thing that bothers me about that is, let's just say it was his brother. The fact that they were so closely known to each other, brothers, grew up together, makes the story that much more powerful. It's a really, really strong line in the story, and if you can read the Bible and not get that from it, you're missing a huge amount of the emotion of that story.
Yeah. I think people often they try to remove their emotions when reading the Bible because they don't want to be biased, right? But I think that's a huge mistake. The entire Bible is like all about riling up your emotions, and if you don't let it do that, you miss a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Daniel. It's been really, really has been a pleasure. We've rescued from the hiccup of talking for more than half an hour without it being on record, and I'm probably not going to live that down this year. Anyway, hopefully we'll be in touch again in the future. When this is edited and it's up online, I'll drop you an email to let you know that it's up. So thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a genuine pleasure.
Yeah, same to you. Same back. It was really awesome. Really enjoyed it. You guys are really thoughtful. Appreciate that. Also not antagonistic. So,
wait until the next show.
Yes. And the same to you, Daniel. If only all conversations were like this.
We are forgetting one thing important, Matthew, and this really is important. Daniel, how do people get in touch with you? What projects are you involved in? Where is your church? You need to tell the listeners, anybody that didn't turn off in the middle of one of my rambling goings on, for the 2 people that are still left, what are you involved in? How do people get in touch with you? Tell us the whole thing.
Sure. I guess, I'm just a pastor. So the church I'm at is called Living Stones Christian Church. And I'm actually starting up a new church in San Diego. So I just moved to San Diego recently. So you can check that out at www.lsccsandiego.com if you're interested in that. Also have a YouTube channel. I need to upload more videos, but it's Daniel the Bible Nerd. So you can check that out. Also Twitter, Daniel Bible Nerd, at Daniel Bible Nerd. Yeah, that's it.
Cool. And for the listeners, if you'd like to get in touch with us, as always, you can drop an email to reasonpress@gmail.com. And in the show notes, there should be a link if you'd like to leave us a voice message rather than sending an email. Just touch the voice link, and your your phone, even if it's an Android, surprisingly, your phone will open up onto a web page and allow you to just send us an audio message. So we look forward to hearing from you. And Matthew, you take us out.
I think you just did. Thank you, everybody, and good night. You have been listening to a podcast by Reason Press. To get in touch, email reasonpress@gmail.com or see our website reasonpress.net, where you'll also find our book Still Unbelievable. We welcome more feedback, and you might even end up on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. You can hear more of her music at soundcloud.com/hollybishop. You can support us by buying some of Holly's music and telling her we sent you.